Hey everyone, welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be looking at something super interesting today.
Yeah, this should be fun.
This is all about eye tracking
Mm.
and specifically how it applies to e-commerce. And we've got a great article here called Eye Tracking Studies, the Invisible Patterns That Determine Conversion Success from the e-commerce psychology blog.
Okay, cool.
So, um, you know, I think a lot of people have heard of eye tracking, but maybe they don't really understand like what it's all about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe we could just start with the basics, like, what is eye tracking and why should we care about it in e-commerce?
Sure. So at its simplest, eye tracking is a way to track where someone is looking on a screen.
Okay,
And it's typically done using specialized cameras that can follow the movement of a person's pupils.
I see.
And so, at first glance, you might think, well, that's kind of creepy.
Yeah, it does sound a little bit Big Brother-ish, right?
Right. But the thing is, it's actually an incredibly valuable tool for understanding how people interact with websites.
Hmm.
Because it gives us a direct window into what's capturing their attention, what they're interested in, what
Yeah.
they're ignoring.
Right.
And that's information that you just can't get from traditional analytics.
I see what you mean. So, like with regular analytics, we can see like what people are clicking on,
Right.
but with eye tracking, we can actually see like where their eyes are going, even if they're not clicking.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of like getting a glimpse into their thought process.
It is, and it can be really revealing because sometimes people don't even realize what they're looking at.
That's interesting.
It's all happening on a subconscious level.
So it's like we're tapping into their subconscious.
Exactly. And that's where the real magic of eye tracking lies.
Okay, but I'm already starting to feel a little overwhelmed just thinking about all the data that we could potentially collect.
Yeah.
So if we were to actually run an eye tracking study,
Hmm.
like what are some of the key things that we should be looking for in the data?
Sure. So there are a few key metrics that are really important to pay attention to.
Okay.
One is called fixation duration, and that's simply how long someone's gaze stays on particular element.
Okay.
So, for example, if people are staring at your call to action button for a really long time,
Mm,
it could indicate that they're having trouble finding it or understanding what it does.
that's a good point.
Another important metric is scan paths. And this is basically the path that a person's eyes take as they're looking at a web page.
Okay, so it's like a visual representation of how they're consuming the content.
Right. And this can tell us a lot about, how they're reading, whether they're skimming or reading carefully.
I bet most people are skimming these days.
You're probably right. We're all so bombarded with information that we've kind of trained ourselves to scan and skim.
I do that all the time.
And eye tracking studies have actually confirmed that people tend to scan online content rather than reading every word.
So that's why it's so important to make our content easy to scan, right?
Exactly. You want to use things like clear headings, bullet points, concise language to make it easy for people to digest the information quickly.
Right.
Another important concept is areas of interest, or AOIs.
Okay, what are those?
So AOIs are basically specific zones on the page that we want to track.
I see.
And they can be anything from a call to action button to a product image to a block of text.
Okay, so we're basically defining the areas that we want to pay attention to.
Exactly. And then we can see how much attention those areas are actually getting.
Okay.
So, for example, if you have a call to action button that's not getting a lot of fixations,
Mm-hmm.
it might mean that you need to rethink its placement, its design, or the copy that you're using.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So these are just a few of the key metrics that we can use to understand how people are interacting with our websites.
Okay, so now that we have a better understanding of how eye tracking works and what kind of data we can collect, let's talk about how we can actually use those insights to improve our websites. And I know you mentioned F patterns and Z patterns earlier, so maybe we can dive into those a little bit more.
Sure. So these are actually common scanning patterns that have been observed in eye tracking studies.
Okay.
So the F pattern is often seen on pages with a lot of text.
Like a blog post or something.
Yeah, exactly. And basically what happens is people tend to scan across the top of the page.
Hmm.
Then they move down the left side, forming kind of an F shape with their gaze.
I see. So it's like they're reading the first couple of lines of each paragraph.
Right, and then they might skim down the rest of the page looking for anything that catches their eye.
Okay, so if we know that people are scanning in an F pattern, how can we use that to our advantage?
Well, it means that we need to make sure that our most important information is placed along that F pattern.
So like the headline, the subheadings, the first few sentences of each paragraph.
Exactly. That's where people are most likely to be looking.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, what about the Z pattern?
So the Z pattern is more common on pages with strong visual elements.
Okay, so like a landing page or a product page.
Yeah. And in this case, people tend to scan across the top of the page, then diagonally down to the bottom left corner,
Okay.
and then finally across the bottom of the page, forming kind of a Z shape.
Interesting. So how can we use the Z pattern to improve our designs?
Well, again, it's all about making sure that our key elements are placed along that Z path.
I see.
So we might want to put a strong visual element at the top of the page.
It's like a hero image.
Yeah, and then maybe our headline and call to action in the middle of the page.
And then maybe some testimonials or social proof at the bottom.
Exactly, and that way we're guiding the user's eye along the path that they're already naturally inclined to follow.
That's really smart.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
And I think the key takeaway here is that we need to be really mindful of how people are visually consuming our content.
Absolutely.
And not just assume that they're going to read everything from top to bottom.
Right.
We need to make it easy for them to find the information that they're looking for.
Exactly. And that's what eye tracking can help us do.
This is fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it really is.
I'm already starting to think about all the ways that we can apply these insights to our own website.
Me too.
And I think the best part is that we're just scratching the surface here.
Right.
There's so much more to learn about eye tracking and how it can be used to improve the user experience.
Definitely. And we'll delve into more of that in the next part of our deep dive.
Awesome. I can't wait. This podcast is powered by Growth Suite. Growth Suite helps you to run smart discount campaigns on your store. Test it for free on your Shopify store. Just land on the Shopify App Store now and test it for free.
Okay, so we've talked about how people scan web pages, the F pattern, the Z pattern.
Right.
But what about the actual content itself, like the images, the videos, the text?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. Like, what can eye tracking tell us about how people interact with different types of content?
So one really interesting finding is that people are naturally drawn to faces.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like an instinctual thing. And so if you're using images on your website, it's a good idea to use images of people, especially if those people are looking directly at your call to action.
That's interesting. So it's like they're drawing the viewer's attention to the button or whatever it is.
Exactly. It's a subtle but powerful way to guide the user's gaze.
I like that. And what about video? I feel like video is so important these days.
Yeah, video is huge. And eye tracking has shown that it can be incredibly engaging. But there's a catch.
Okay, what's that?
You have to use it strategically.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like, you don't want to just throw a video on your website and expect it to work miracles.
Right. You need to think about the purpose of the video, where it's placed, and how it fits into the overall user experience.
Right.
And you also don't want to overdo it.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely been to websites where there's like a million animations and pop-ups and it's just like sensory overload.
Yeah, exactly. Too much movement can actually be distracting and off-putting.
So it's all about finding the right balance.
It is, and that's where eye tracking can really help you fine-tune your designs.
This is making me think about the article we're looking at. They highlighted a few case studies of companies that have used eye tracking to improve their websites. And one that really stood out to me was the Liberty London example.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one.
They actually increased their revenue by £4 million
Yeah.
just by making a few changes to their website based on eye tracking data.
It's amazing, right? And what's really cool is that the changes they made weren't even that drastic.
Yeah, they were just really smart about how they used visuals and calls to action.
Exactly. And it just goes to show that even small changes can have a big impact.
Okay, so let's say I'm convinced I want to start using eye tracking for my own business.
Right.
But where do I even begin? Like, is this something I can do myself, or do I need to hire a fancy agency?
Well, you have a few options.
But
You could run your own eye tracking studies, but that can be pretty expensive and time consuming.
yeah, I was thinking that, like, I don't have a lab in my basement or anything.
Right. And you need specialized equipment and software.
So what's a more realistic option for someone like me?
Well, there are actually a lot of great online tools and platforms that can provide you with eye tracking data without breaking the bank.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they use things like heat maps and scroll maps to show you how people are interacting with your website.
Okay, so I could see, like, where people are clicking, where they're dropping off, what's grabbing their attention.
Exactly. And that information can be really valuable for making informed design decisions.
That's awesome. So it's not like I need to be a data scientist to use eye tracking.
Not at all. And the best part is that a lot of these tools are really user-friendly.
This is great news. I'm feeling much more optimistic now.
Good. And remember, it's all about continuous improvement.
Hmm.
You don't have to do everything at once. Just start small.
Yeah.
Make some changes based on the data you collect, and then see what happens.
Right. It's like an iterative process.
Exactly. And over time, you'll start to see real results.
So we've talked about how to collect eye tracking data and how to use it to improve our websites. But how do we actually measure the impact?
Yeah, that's an important question.
Like, how do we know if it's actually working?
So you want to look at things like conversion rates, bounce rates, time on site.
Okay.
And basically, you're looking for improvements in these metrics after you've made changes based on the eye tracking data.
So it's not just about seeing a spike in sales. It's about understanding how eye tracking has influenced user behavior.
Right. And it's important to remember that it's not always a direct correlation. Like sometimes you might make a change that improves the user experience but doesn't directly lead to more sales.
I see.
But that doesn't mean it wasn't a valuable change.
Right, because it could be setting the stage for future conversions.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to track a variety of metrics and look at the big picture.
This is all really helpful.
Mm,
I'm starting to feel like I have a much better grasp on eye tracking now.
good. I'm glad to hear that.
So we've covered a lot of ground today, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the future of eye tracking.
Yeah.
Like, where do you see this technology going in the next few years?
Well, I think we're going to see eye tracking become even more accessible and affordable.
Hmm.
And as a result, I think we're going to see it being used in more and more applications.
Like what kind of applications?
Well, for starters, I think we're going to see it being used more in mobile devices.
Okay.
As smartphones and tablets become even more ubiquitous.
Right.
I also think we're going to see it being used in new and innovative ways, like in virtual reality and augmented reality.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, it really is. And I think it has the potential to revolutionize the way we interact with technology.
So it's not just about websites anymore. It's about the entire digital landscape.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes eye tracking so fascinating.
I completely agree. This has been a really eye-opening conversation,
I'm glad you found it helpful.
and I'm excited to see what the future holds for this technology. Okay, so we've talked about all the amazing things that eye tracking can do, but are there any downsides or limitations that we should be aware of?
Yeah, definitely. Eye tracking is a powerful tool, but it's not a magic bullet.
Right.
One thing to keep in mind is that the data can be influenced by a lot of different factors.
Okay, like what?
Well, for example, the lighting conditions in the room can affect the accuracy of the eye tracker.
I see.
And the way that the participant is sitting or holding their head can also make a difference.
So it's not always a perfect reflection of what they're actually looking at.
Right. And then there's the issue of interpretation.
Yeah.
Even if you have perfect data, it still takes some expertise to analyze it and draw meaningful conclusions.
So it's not something that just anyone can pick up and do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You need to understand the different metrics, the different patterns, and how to interpret them in the context of your specific goals.
Right. That makes sense. And I imagine that there are also some practical barriers to implementation. I'm guessing that the equipment and software can be pretty expensive.
Yeah, that's true. Especially if you're talking about high-end eye trackers.
And then there's the cost of recruiting participants and running the studies.
Right. It can definitely be a significant investment.
But I guess with any new technology, the costs are likely to come down over time.
Yeah, definitely. We're already seeing that happening. There are more and more affordable eye trackers on the market, and there are also a lot of online tools that can provide you with basic eye tracking data without breaking the bank.
That's good to know. So overall, it sounds like eye tracking is a really promising tool, but it's important to be aware of the limitations and to make sure that you're using it in a way that makes sense for your business.
Absolutely. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the future of eye tracking. Where do you see this technology going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, that's a great question. I think we're going to see some really exciting developments in the coming years.
Okay.
Well, for one thing, I think we're going to see eye tracking become even more integrated into our everyday lives.
Interesting.
We're already seeing it being used in things like gaming and virtual reality.
Right.
And I think we're only going to see more of that. I think it's going to become commonplace to interact with technology using our eyes.
So it's like the next step beyond touchscreens and voice assistants.
Exactly. It's a much more natural and intuitive way to interact with machines.
That's cool. And I also imagine that the technology itself is going to continue to improve.
Oh, yeah, Definitely. The eye trackers are going to become more accurate, more affordable, and more portable.
And that's going to open up a whole new world of possibilities for research and application.
We're going to be able to use eye tracking to study all sorts of things that we couldn't even dream of before.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to see what the future holds for this technology.
Me too.
Yeah.
It has the potential to really change the way we understand the world.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into the world of eye tracking. I've learned so much.
I'm glad to hear that.
And I'm sure our listeners have too. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, if you're interested in learning more about eye tracking, be sure to check out the article that we mentioned earlier, Eye Tracking Studies, the Invisible Patterns That Determine Conversion Success, from the e-commerce psychology blog. It's a great resource for anyone who wants to dive deeper into this fascinating topic. And that's it for this week's Deep Dive. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Bye! This podcast was powered by Growth Suite. Growth Suite helps you to run smart discount campaigns on your store. Test it for free on your Shopify store. Just land on the Shopify App Store now and test it for free.